Welcome to today's deep dive. We've got a really intense one for you today. So I want you to imagine you're forced to drive a passenger bus through the dead of night.
Just pitch black outside.
Yeah, totally pitch black. The engine's humming, and you finally glance up into the rearview mirror. And sitting behind you in that, dim flickering light are 25 passengers.
But they're not strangers, right?
Exactly. As your eyes adjust, you realize they are every excuse you've ever made. They're like your deep-seated fears, your toxic habits, your insecurities, all just staring right back at you.
Which is terrifying.
It really is. And the chilling reality of this ride is that you can't stop driving. Not until you systematically walk down the aisle, look every single one of them in the eye, and kick them off the bus.
It's just a profoundly uncomfortable scenario. Because it strips away all those polite fictions we tell ourselves.
Oh, for sure.
You're no longer dealing with abstract concepts like, I need to be better at time management. You're literally locked in a moving vehicle with your own psychological baggage, made of flesh and bone.
And that terrifying, brilliant premise is the absolute core of our deep dive today. We are exploring a really striking fictional novel from 2026 by Alen Brbutovic. It's called Bus 25. For every man who has lost his way.
Yeah, and if you are looking for like a gentle hand-holding self-help book, this is absolutely not it.
Not even close. I mean, even the physical book itself feels like a warning label. Have you seen the cover?
Oh yeah, it's intense.
It's this unapologetic, almost blinding orange background. And right in the dead center is a sleek, dark passenger bus facing forward. And the words BUS 25 are just glowing fiercely on the digital display.
It really doesn't invite you in. It challenges you to step aboard.
Exactly. So our mission today is to use this novel's brutal honesty to help you, the listener, look at the hidden passengers holding the steering wheel in your own life.
And the story drops us right into the deep end from page 1. The prologue opens on the protagonist's 25th birthday.
Right.
He's exhausted, he's deeply unfulfilled, and he just falls asleep fully dressed. And he slips into this vivid, hyper-realistic dream.
Where he's at the bus stop.
Yeah, standing at a freezing bus stop in his hometown of Zenica. But he isn't alone. Standing right next to him is his father, who actually passed away years ago.
And the father character is just phenomenal. He is so grounded, weather-beaten, and completely devoid of sentimentality.
Completely.
To set the tone of who this guy is, he turns to his son at this freezing stop and reminds him of this harsh, darkly funny local joke.
Oh, the Zenica joke, yeah.
Right. He says that when a man in Zenica has no BMW, no savings, and no viable exit strategy for his life, he does three things. He grows a mustache, he masters violence, and he produces offspring.
It's such a brutal commentary.
It really is. It's about how people manufacture a false sense of power when they feel entirely powerless.
And that joke, it perfectly establishes the father's philosophical baseline. He despises performative toughness.
He sees right through it.
Exactly. He sees right through the masks people wear to hide their failures. So when bus No. 25 arrives with a long hiss of those air brakes, the father forces his son on board.
Makes him sit right in the driver's seat.
Right. And he essentially acts as the ruthless conductor of his son's psyche. He points out the 25 flawed versions of his son sitting in the seats.
And he refuses to let the bus stop until the son confronts the mechanisms of his own misery.
Yeah.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because before the bus can even get moving, before we can talk about the destination, we have to look at why the protagonist, and honestly, so many of us, refuse to put our foot on the gas in the first place.
The inaction.
Right. The father immediately targets this cluster of passengers sitting right up front. They represent the paralysis of the present. So we're talking laziness, procrastination, and overthinking.
The psychology of inaction here is fascinating because we rarely identify it correctly in ourselves.
True.
Take laziness, for example. The passenger representing laziness is slumped in his seat, looking exhausted. And he claims he's just, tired.
But the father completely deconstructs this.
He really does. He tells his son that laziness is not biological fatigue. It's a neurological addiction to comfort. Yeah, because the brain is hardwired to seek homeostasis, right? To conserve energy. So when you sleep for 10 hours, or delay a difficult conversation, or just scroll on your phone for half the day, your brain tells you that you're recovering.
But the father exposes that as a lie.
Exactly. You aren't recovering. You are actively avoiding the friction required for growth.
Calling procrastination arrogance caught me off guard at first, too. Because, we usually view procrastination as a symptom of anxiety or maybe just poor planning.
Right, like an organizational flaw.
Yeah. But the father frames it as a massive ego trip. He says procrastination is the arrogant assumption that time actually belongs to you and that tomorrow is guaranteed.
That hits hard.
Doesn't it? When you procrastinate, you're essentially telling the universe, I can afford to waste today because my future is promised. It is breathtakingly arrogant when you frame it that way.
It completely flips the script. Procrastination becomes an illusion of control. It tricks your brain into feeling powerful.
Because you're deciding to withhold your effort until some perfect later date.
Exactly. And the father's core thesis here is that readiness is a total myth. The strongest people do not wait to feel ready.
Because motivation isn't a prerequisite for action.
Right. It's a byproduct of action. You build rhythm and discipline first.
Mm-hmm.
And then the biological feeling of motivation eventually catches up to the reality of your momentum.
I want to look at the third passenger in this group, though. Overthinking. Because on the surface, overthinking doesn't look like a flaw. It looks like responsibility.
It was smart. Yeah.
Isn't checking your parachute 5 times before you jump out of an airplane just good strategy? I mean, you want to gather all the data before you make a move so you don't ruin your life.
What's fascinating here is how the father anticipates that exact defense mechanism. Overthinking disguises itself as intellectual rigor.
But it's not.
No. The father argues that overthinking is just stalling dressed up in a tuxedo. He delivers one of the most piercing lines in the book. He says, "You fail standing still."
You fail standing
Wow.
still.
Yeah, because when you sit in a room and overthink a decision, you are running endless simulations in your head with zero real-world feedback. You're generating anxiety, not data. Action is the only thing that generates actual data.
Because action forces a collision with reality.
Precisely. You act, you collide with reality, you see what breaks, you correct it, and you move again. Speed beats perfection every single time.
Right, because perfection is rooted in the fear of being judged, whereas speed is rooted in the desire to learn.
You cannot think your way into confidence. The father forces his son to physically throw these 3 passengers out the doors into the cold night,
Okay.
proving that the only way to cure the paralysis of the present is raw, unpolished momentum.
Exactly.
So let's trace the causal line here. The moment you finally beat inaction, you kick out the laziness, the arrogance of procrastination, the endless stalling, you put your foot on the gas.
The bus starts moving.
Right. But immediately, a new vulnerability opens up.
Yeah.
Because you're finally moving, you suddenly become hyper-aware of who is watching you move. The friction of the outside world hits the windshield, which introduces the next cluster of passengers.
Yes. Weak boundaries, seeking validation, and envy.
Once you are in motion, your psychological survival depends entirely on how you navigate the noise of other people. And weak boundaries is one of the most insidious passengers on the bus.
Because he looks like a saint.
Yes. He's polite, he's gentle, and he's utterly exhausted. He is the part of the protagonist that always says yes when he desperately wants to say no.
It's basically an autoimmune response in your social life. Your brain misidentifies the mild, temporary discomfort of disappointing someone as a fatal threat to your survival.
That's a great way to put it.
So floods your system with this overwhelming urge to appease, just to neutralize the immediate anxiety of saying no.
Yeah.
You end up betraying yourself just to keep the peace.
And the father violently tears down this nice guy illusion. The passenger claims he's just being compassionate and generous, but the father exposes the underlying mechanism.
That giving your time and energy to everyone isn't love.
Right. It's a coward's fear of being disliked. You let people drain you because you value their validation more than you value your own freedom. The father states, compassion is strength. Self-sacrifice is not.
Wow.
If you sacrifice yourself to appease others, you are simply teaching the world that your peace is cheap.
I love that. It's like leaving the front door of your house wide open, letting anyone walk in and take your furniture, and then calling yourself a philanthropist because you didn't lock the door.
That's the exact dynamic, which naturally brings us to the passenger sitting right across the aisle. Envy.
Right. If weak boundaries is about letting people take from you, envy is about obsessing over what other people have.
The father calls it a silent rot that makes victims out of highly capable men. And envy is fascinating because society generally dismisses it as a simple moral failing, a toxic sin we should repress.
But the father sees it differently.
He does. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the father reveals that envy is actually a highly tuned diagnostic tool. We only envy what we secretly believe we are capable of, but are too terrified to attempt.
So you don't envy a concert pianist unless you secretly harbor a desire for artistic mastery.
Exactly. You envy your peer who started a successful business because it reflects your own unacted upon ambition back at you.
So envy is basically a compass pointing directly at your repressed desires.
That's it. And the father's solution isn't to pray the envy away. His solution is to utilize it. Turn the jealousy into a schematic for your own progress.
So admire, then outwork them.
Right. If you feel the rot of envy when you look at someone else's success, you acknowledge the desire, you admire their execution, and then you outwork them. You use the visceral sting of jealousy as the fuel to build your own competence.
Okay, so you're moving forward. You've established momentum, you've built boundaries, and you've tuned out the applause and the judgments of the crowd. You're fully in your own lane.
Making progress.
Yeah, but eventually you check the rearview mirror, and when you look back, you see the wreckage of your own mistakes, the people you've let down.
Yeah.
The failures.
It's a whole different trap.
It is. That introduces a completely different kind of paralysis, bringing us to the ghosts of the past. Fear of failure, regret, and guilt.
These passengers don't try to stop the bus by attacking the engine. They try to stop it by attacking the driver's right to steer.
The physical description of the guilt passenger is so haunting.
It really is. He sits there trembling, shoulders slumped, constantly whispering apologies.
He embodies the belief that because you've caused pain in the past, you are permanently disqualified from a successful future.
And the father's handling of this is so sharp. He looks at the guilt passenger and says, "Conscience corrects, guilt condemns."
So what does this all mean? Because that is a profound psychological distinction.
Conscience is the alarm bell that tells you your actions are out of alignment with your values, so you can fix your behavior. But guilt is actually a form of vanity.
Wait, vanity.
Absolute vanity. Guilt is self-pity dressed up in the costume of morality. When you sit around feeling guilty for years over something you did, you are actually making someone else's pain about your feelings. You perform this endless emotional self-flagellation to prove to yourself and the world that you're a good person who feels bad.
So you're centering yourself again.
Exactly. The father brutally points out that holding on to guilt doesn't prove you care. It proves you refuse to heal. Sitting in shame helps absolutely no one.
I hear that, but I have to push back a little. Because I look at the passenger of regret, and part of me thinks, well, don't we need regret?
How do you mean?
If we just drop our regret on the side of the highway and drive off, won't we lose our humanity? Won't we just hurt people all over again because we've thrown away the emotional weight of what we did?
This raises an important question, and it's the exact trap the regret passenger tries to set for the protagonist. He argues that his pain is the only thing keeping the protagonist cautious and moral.
Right.
But the father introduces a vital mechanism for handling the past. He says you do not build a shrine to your mistakes. You build a lesson.
So you actively strip the raw emotion, the shame, and the suffering away from the memory.
And you just keep the data.
You extract the manual, but you leave the misery behind.
Precisely. The past is not a cinematic loop meant to be replayed every time you feel insecure. It's an archive of cause and effect data. You turn the knife that cut you into a tool that serves you.
That reframing of forgiveness is huge.
Yeah. Forgiveness, in the context of this book, is simply giving up the toxic hope that the past could somehow be different. You accept the data, you evict the shame, and you keep driving.
Well, we are getting to the final miles of this brutal journey. The bus is mostly empty now.
The obvious villains are gone.
Yeah, he threw out the laziness, the envy, the guilt. But the few passengers left sitting in the back are the absolute hardest to approach because they don't look like monsters.
They look like virtue.
Exactly. They look like love and connection. We arrive at attachment and the fear of loneliness.
These are the passengers that are woven most deeply into our fundamental human biology. We're social creatures, so our brains are terrified of isolation.
And the attachment passenger uses that. He wears a faded, comfortable jacket and looks at the protagonist with pleading eyes.
Right, he claims he represents loyalty. He says, "I am the part of you that never gives up on people. I stay no matter how much it hurts." That is love.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because the father's own backstory gives him the absolute authority to shatter this illusion. We learn that the father buried his own wife. He buried his closest friends.
He experienced profound, world-altering grief.
But he never allowed that grief to become a leash. He looks his son in the eye and explains the mechanism of false loyalty. Attachment is not love. Attachment is dependence.
Love says, "I want you in my life." Attachment says, "I cannot psychologically survive without you."
It's the crucial difference between a life jacket and a heavy iron anchor. When you're terrified of drowning, you might grab onto an iron anchor just because it feels solid and heavy,
You grip it tightly, confusing its weight for safety.
when in reality, it's the very thing dragging you to the bottom of the ocean.
That analogy is perfect.
Yeah.
The father teaches that detachment isn't about being cold, distant, or unfeeling. Detachment is the ultimate freedom to love someone without trying to own them.
It's the ability to deeply appreciate something beautiful and still possess the internal strength to walk away the moment it begins to compromise your integrity.
Right. You stop demanding that other people serve as the structural foundation for your own identity.
Which flows seamlessly into the final passenger on the bus, the fear of loneliness. This passenger is terrified of silence.
He's the impulse that makes us fill every quiet moment of our lives with podcasts or music or social media scrolling.
Just constant noise.
Because silence is a mirror. When you remove the external stimuli, you are forced to sit alone with your own thoughts. And for many people, that is a terrifying neighborhood to walk through.
But the father makes his final defining distinction here. He explained that loneliness is simply the fear of being forgotten by the outside world. It's an external metric.
That's solitude.
Solitude is an internal fortress. Solitude is the immense, quiet strength of knowing exactly who you are, what you stand for, and what you will not tolerate when absolutely no one is watching to applaud you.
The father tells his son that owning yourself is the ultimate freedom. If you do not possess sovereignty over your own mind, you have nothing. No matter how vast your wealth is or how many people surround you.
It all comes back to taking the wheel. Because this novel, Bus 25, it isn't offering a utopian vision of the future. The road doesn't magically pave itself once you take control.
The potholes are still there. The dark night is still there.
But when you evict the hidden passengers, you finally stop fighting yourself for control of the steering wheel. You take absolute, uncompromising ownership of every flaw and every fear.
And you purposefully kick them out into the cold so you can finally navigate the road ahead.
It's a brutal, unapologetic mirror. And while the protagonist had 25 specific weaknesses to face on that dark road in Zenica, the reality is that every single one of us has our own crowded bus.
We all have passengers we have allowed to ride along in our minds for years.
Maybe your passenger is disguised as caution, endlessly checking the parachute so you never have to jump. Or maybe it's disguised as compassion, bleeding you dry so you don't have to face the discomfort of setting a boundary.
Or maybe it's a heavy anchor of guilt keeping you stuck in the past because it feels nobler than moving forward. The mechanism of change begins the moment you stop pretending those passengers are driving you against your will.
And you realize you're the one who's been keeping the doors locked. So as you step away from this deep dive today and back into the rhythm of your own life, we want to leave you with one final, lingering question to ponder.
Something to really sit with.
Pay attention to the friction points in your day. The moment you hesitate to speak up, the moment you reach for a distraction, the moment you feel a flash of resentment. When you feel that friction, look at the rearview mirror of your own mind. Which hidden passenger is sitting quietly in the back, holding the steering wheel without you even realizing it?
And more importantly,
Are you finally ready to hit the brakes, open the door, and tell them their ride is over?